So the problem was that the meeting wasn't getting live streamed, and the people who know about these things haven't been able to cure it. So we should go ahead as planned in the room. The meeting will be audio recorded, and that will be put up on the website afterwards, so people can hear the meeting who are not here afterwards. Yeah, and but it won't be now. So we can move on from where we got to. So it's time for introductions. So the people at this end of the room, I'm Marion Le Pedvin, I'm chair for of this committee, and I'm councillor for Newtown and Heatherlands Ward in Poole.
Oh, I'm Paul Hilliard, councillor for Muddyford, Scampit and West Highcliffe.
Hello, councillor Felicity Rice, Oakdale Ward.
Julian Martin, councillor for Boscombe West.
Sharon Carl-Brown, councillor for Queen's Park.
Cameron Adams, councillor for Kinson. Peter Sidaway, Broadstone.
Joe Clements, Penhill Ward.
Michael Tarling, councillor for Christchurch Town.
Kate Salmon, councillor for Moordown.
David Flagg, Burton Grange.
Matt Gillett, Talbotwoods.
All right.
Robert Firth, senior solicitor.
Jean Bronning, interim head of planning.
David Hodges, interim development management manager.
Democratic Services, but
yeah.
Formal introduction, please.
Jill Holyoake, Democratic Services. Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor John Challoner and Councillor Brian Hitchcock, and there are no substitute members.
Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, I have to declare an interest with one of the objectors to the second item in POL, and I will be recusing myself from the debate discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we move on to confirming the minutes of the 21st of September and the 4th of October. So taking the 21st of September first, is everybody happy with these minutes? Any issues to raise? Agreed, thank you. And then moving on to the following one. Sorry, I got the date wrong, 2nd of October. Any issues? Everybody happy?
Agreed.
Thank you. I'll sign those before the end of the meeting. So after the officer presentation on each application, we'll hear public speakers, objectors or supporters as the case may be, followed by ward councillors, if any, and other councillors who may want to speak. And then we'll come on to the discussion. So we start on the first application, which is 72 Browning Avenue. And I'll hand over to the case officer who is on screen.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee members. Right, the presentation should run fine. There was a problem earlier on, so forgive me if there's any errors with the presentation. The software was playing up a bit. It should work fine now. Good morning. This is the planning application for 72 Browning Avenue in Bournemouth. The application is for an outline permission for demolition of everything on site and the erection of a block of 13 flats with associated parking, access, bin and cycle storage. Appearance and landscaping are reserved matters. I can explain that in more detail if there's any confusion about that. The application has been called in because the number of representations received exceeds the total in the scheme of delegated powers. The site is located on the northern side of Boscombe Overcliff Drive at the eastern corner of the junction with Browning Avenue. To the immediate east sits Boscombe Cliff Bowling Green Club, bowling club and pavilion, and a large flatted block sits on the other side of the junction with a mixture of two-storey detached and bungalow houses to the north. The cliff lies to the south. The property was built as a detached house between 1924 and 1938. but it's been in use as flats, at least 3 of them since the 1980s. There is a detached garage block within the plot at the back, which you can see just to the rear of the building here. It has a large frontage garden hidden from public view. The peaks are possible through to the bowling green and vice versa. It has an unattractive side elevation facing onto Browning Avenue, and its principal elevation is shielded from view by the large planting on the street frontage. The sea frontage is characterised by a number of flatted developments. At Penrith Road, the next junction to the west, the 2 corners are bookended by a large pair of noughties era 3- and 4-storey block of flats that turn the corner inland, stepping down from 4 to 3 storeys. Elsewhere on the frontage, corner redevelopment at Keswick Road and Woodland Road rise to 4 and 5 storeys. Moving east, the story is the same. The corner unit at Woodland Road you saw in the previous photo tears down from 4 to 3 as the development runs inland. Other views of the 70s and 80s Wentworth Close development, a more recent run of 4- and 5-storey new builders are shown here on the screen. On Browning Avenue itself, some plots have been redeveloped for 3-storey flats. The blocks opposite at 55 and 57, and in the case of the adjacent site to the north of the application site, 70 Browning Avenue has been redeveloped semi-detached and detached houses. Both 55 and 57 have a somewhat pastiche or hybrid appearance, attempting to incorporate the design and characteristics of domestic scale houses into the exterior of larger scale blocks of flats, with the addition of roofs and lintels and things that are normally associated with houses. So to the proposal. Outline Planning Permission is sought to clear the site and erect a single block of 13 homes, as I said, over 4 floors. The proposal seeks to reserve the matters relating to landscaping and appearance. So what you have before you are indicative elevations and indicative landscaping on the following drawings. What is proposed is access, layout and scale. They all form part of this submission. The scheme has been reduced in scale and height to the rear since submission through negotiation, with changes made to the car park, the SUDs, waste and cycle storage, and to the unit mix to increase the number of 3-bed units. With regards to access, a new vehicular crossing is proposed here, with the existing 2 access points made redundant and sealed back up and made into proper pavement curb edge. An electronic sliding gate would regulate access to the car park, but not the building. The lobby would have 2 doors, one in the car park and one to the street to allow people in. Cycle parking is within the building and access from the car park. Bins are serviced from the road here onto the entrance road, but residents would have access into the bin store area here. So there wouldn't be any possibility of people coming from the beach and dumping their rubbish because we have a gate at this end. In terms of scale, the proposal has a stepped footprint moving away from the rear of number 70B as it moves upwards. The interface distances are set out in paragraph 8 of the report. In total, we have 46% 3-bed, 46% 2-bed and 8% 1-bed. What that means is 6 3-bed flats, 6 2-bed flats and 1 1-bed flat. The purple dashed line on these drawings show you how the application was submitted, and obviously the clear drawing shows what it looks like now as proposed. So there's been some reductions. This is 70B, this is Browning Avenue. So you can see here some levels have been pushed back further away, and there's been some slight design tweaks to indicate the potential for a bit of a feature on the frontage. Elevations are indicative, but what we're looking at is scale. So the position relative to those buildings is what's being fixed. How the elevations end up looking exactly is for a reserve matters. Regards to site layout, come back to the plan you've seen before. The property would sit forward of the existing property position. Here you have the dotted line showing the current building, and this is where the proposed building would sit. Just to scan back quickly to the location plan, which gives us a clear view of building lines. You can see here on the top left, this is the position of the block of flats at 57 forward onto the street, and this is the position relative to that of where the building would come forward, sit forward. Balconies and terraces are provided for all flats, bar the ground floor units which have use of gardens. They're of a practical size. The balconies project outwards. So what you see on this plan, the building line, the front main wall of the property is this. The dotted lines are where the balconies would project outwards. Primary windows would face seawards, south, onto Browning Avenue or the bowling green, west or east, with limited glazing on the north. So there's not much on the back. And you can see at ground floor, it's service and access. And then as you rise to first floor, it steps back into the building, so increasing the distances. 46 cycle spaces are provided within the building, and 20 car parking spaces are provided. Bins to the Browning Road, as I explained, hidden behind walling and planting. Earlier plans showed them being underground. These have been altered now to provide above ground to improve serviceability. The garden area here is to be split into three. This family 3-bed unit here would have this garden. This family 3-bed unit here would have this garden, and this 1-bed unit would have this a smaller garden. With regards to internal layout, you have the plan pack, and you can see in more detail than this drawing will show you, but the flat plan repeats itself between floors, which is good for stacking, so you get less complaints between residents because of noisiness in different rooms. Each elevation would feature windows lighting habitable rooms and spaces. Now, layout sets the position of those windows, so although we don't have appearance, we do know where the windows will be, so we can make assessments on amenity impacts. The units are all accessed internally off a lobby, which is served by a central staircase and a lift. The internal layout meets internal space standards, with each of the flats provided with sufficient space. Each of the flats would have adequate lighting, access, storage, and privacy is satisfactory with regards to impact on neighbouring properties. Can everyone still see the presentation? My screen's done something funny. Since drafting the report, the waste and drainage issues have been resolved, as set out in the addendum report. Sufficient space exists to enable both elements to be addressed via reserve matters and the application of conditions. The drawing here, just to clarify a bit more detail you couldn't see before, the bins will be stored behind an enclosure here with landscaping provided around it, and an underground chamber sufficient to store water has been proposed here. We're waiting to hear back from the consultees whether this is satisfactory in terms of size, but from previous schemes it does appear so. This concludes the visual presentation. I just want to summarise a couple of things from the report for members so that everything's clear. Aside from the usual planning assessment, the report focuses a lot on heritage and the fallback demolition permitted by the prior approval process. Heritage issues are assessed in paragraphs 44 to 45 and 62 to 87 of the report. There is a fallback position of permitted demolition, and that is relevant to any decision, but consideration must be given to the likelihood of that demolition actually happening. The matter is discussed in full in paragraphs 42 and 43 of the report. The report, in concluding, sets out 3 policy conflicts. With regards to paragraph 164A, limited weight should be attached to the absence of one number visitor per car parking space. With regards to paragraph 164B, limited weight should be attached to the loss of the non-designated heritage asset. And thirdly, since the publication of the committee report, the issue of drainage discussed in paragraph 164C has been resolved. The addendum report explains how this element is no longer contrary to policy. With regard to some other matters, the proposal would provide an off-site contribution of £140,573 to affordable housing, which is a significant benefit. It would also pay the standard mitigation payments of £3,310 and a contingency for £5,000 towards off-site reptile habitat rehoming, should this prove necessary as a result of the condition requiring ecology surveys. There will be no adverse impacts on adjacent occupiers that would warrant a recommendation for refusal. Conditions and reserve matters can satisfactorily control all other aspects for later determination. As a result of the changes to the drainage and waste arrangement, a revised recommendation is summarised in the addendum report. The recommendation remains the same, that the need for an additional drainage condition is removed. Changes to the wording of some conditions are proposed, and they're set out in the addendum report. Thank you, Chair. That concludes the presentation.
Thank you. So now we move on to submissions and representations from other people. Could we have details of who has requested to speak?
Thank you, Chair. So there are no registered objectors. There are 2 people to speak on behalf of the applicant. The first is Matt Annan, to be followed by Alex Harwood. Beg your pardon. Of course. Yep.
Good morning. I'm Alex Harwood, a heritage consultant from Touring Co. and until recently a conservation officer for Dorset Council. I was commissioned to undertake a heritage assessment for this application following the conservation officer's objections. I've assessed the property for its potential as a non-designated heritage asset, the criteria and standards that underpin the emerging BCP Local Heritage List from February 2022. The property is considered to have no archaeological value, no communal value, low to moderate historic illustrative value, low to moderate historic associative value, low to moderate architectural value, and low aesthetic value. My conclusion is that the building does not meet the requirements of the emerging criteria necessary for it to be considered as eligible for the BCP Local Heritage List, or in other words, as a non-designated heritage asset. Therefore, no further assessment of impacts has been undertaken with respect to this building. An assessment of the setting of Boscombe Cliff Bowling Pavilion as a locally listed building has been undertaken. It is not considered that the proposals would impact the identified elements of setting which contribute to the significance of the locally listed building that focus on its spatial relationship with the existing routeways and the bowling green, and the visual experience from the immediate surroundings which permit this and their architectural form and historic interest as a communal asset to be understood and appreciated. For these reasons, and in my professional opinion, I consider the development would result in no harm to the significance of the locally listed building through impacts to its setting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And as you heard, there's a material fallback position in the form of that consent has already been granted for the building's demolition. The planning officer has comprehensively explained the full details of the proposed scheme in his opening presentation to you. And actually throughout this process, we've worked closely with your officers and the internal consultees and external consultees, for which we thank them for their efforts in this regard. In addition to the points made by Alex, I just want to outline further considerations why we feel planning permission should be granted today in line with the officer's recommendation. Firstly, principle and character. As you'll be aware, Bournemouth is a significant shortfall in housing, and as such, the benefits from the supply of new homes must have significant weight in the tilted balance in favour of granting this proposal. This scheme delivers 10 additional high-quality dwellings in a sustainable location. Of the 13 flats proposed, as you've heard, 6 are 3 beds, 6 are 2 beds, and 1 unit is a 1 bed. This is an acceptable mix, as confirmed in your officer's report, and meets the aims of policy BAP 6 of the Boscombe and Folkestone Neighbourhood Plan. As set out in your officer's report, the LPA considered the principal flats in this location acceptable. The scale and density would maintain and enhance the quality of the street scene and respects the site and its surroundings. Secondly, amenity. As set out in paragraphs 97 to 106 of your reports, given the proposed siting of the building, the distances to neighbouring properties, together with the floor plan layouts of window arrangements and their orientations of their outlooks, this would ensure that the proposed scheme would not have any harmful, overlooking or over-dominant impact on any adjoining neighbours. All units meet the nationally prescribed minimum space standards. All habitable rooms have been arranged to receive ample levels of natural daylight with good outlooks. Each flat has its own private balcony or garden area. Therefore, the scheme provides a high level of residential amenity for future residents. Thirdly, highways and parking. As you've heard, 20 car parking spaces have been provided for the 13 flats. 100% electric vehicle charging point provision. If the car parking spaces are unallocated, the scheme meets the parking SPD. However, given the high quality and desirable location of these flats, the parking spaces are proposed to be allocated, and as such, this scheme technically is 1 visitor parking space short. Conversely, though, the SPD requires only 30 cycle spaces, and we've provided 46 within an integral store, so a surplus of 16 spaces. As set out in your officer's report, the under-provision of 1 car parking space is outweighed by the over-provision of 16 cycle spaces, because this encourages more sustainable modes of transport in line with the SPD. The Council's Highways Officer is in full support of this application. However, if members are concerned by the lack of 1 parking spaces, we have also prepared a site layout which provides this additional space, and the applicants would be happy for members to determine the scheme on that basis if they preferred. Other benefits include Council's Ecologist has no objection to the proposal. The applicant's willing to provide bat and bird boxes together with hedgehog fencing, green living roofs on the building, delivering biodiversity net gains. Also, the applicants agreed to provision of £140,000 affordable housing contribution, which is secured by a Section 6 agreement. Members, in summary, the scheme delivers 13 high-quality dwellings with good levels of amenity in a sustainable location, close to local shops, services and schools, whilst not detrimentally impacting on character, appearance of the area, neighbouring amenity or highway safety. Thank you for your attention. I hope you agree with the officer's recommendation to grant planning. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe we have a ward councillor who wishes to speak on the issue. Councillor George Farquhar.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Councillor George Farquhar and proud to represent Boscombe East and Folkestone, where this application actually lies. And thank you for your indulgence for my late notification to speak today. I'm broadly very supportive of this particular application. I wanted to take the opportunity as a ward councillor and a former member of this particular committee to thank the officers for the highly detailed, all 52 pages or so of this application. The reason I want to thank them is because all areas of concern from my experience and as a ward councillor were covered in detail. In particular, the nature of the decision making and the weighing up of the different factors, the different policies, etc., and the recognition of the sovereignty of the Boscombe and Folkestone Neighbourhood Plan, referred to as BAP. That's very much appreciated by myself as the ward councillor and very much appreciated by the residents because it gives them an understanding of the permitted development, prior approval, consent for demolition, etc. And I thought it was very useful to understand the fallback position. It was an eye-opener to me. The other thing which I was really appreciative of was the explanation of the difference of opinion between the planning authority and the heritage officers as regards the nature of this particular existing building and the proposal for the application. The other things which I was really impressed with was the focus on the ecology and the biodiversity with the such things. The small details are very important. I was also pleased with the planning permission or outline application for the parking provision, which is very important in this particular site. Being a ward councillor and walking my dog very often, then I'm very familiar with this site. And overall, if I was still on the committee, I would be hard pressed to find a reason not to grant this application today. But thank you very much for your indulgence, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the residents and recognise the sovereignty of the Boscombe and Folkestone Neighbourhood Plan. I would, however, just ask one request to move the bar up slightly more. Within the Boscombe and Folkestone Neighbourhood Plan, which the forum came into being in 2016, and the plan was recognised by referendum for the residents in 2019 with a 93 percentile, is that the residents for the Boscombe and Folkestone Neighbourhood Plan took a great deal of time to put their ideas forward for what they wanted for their community. The ward itself is diverse, but there is one aspect in BAP 1 which I'd just like to read to the committee, and the request to the officers that they address that in future applications whereby a fallback position of demolition is highlighted by permitted development, I believe, or prior approval. It says this: proposals involving the demolition of existing buildings will not be supported unless there is exceptional circumstances to justify this, which include: 1, the building is of poor quality design and out of keeping with the wider character of the area. 2, there is evidence that the building is not structurally capable of retention and conversion. And 3, there is clear evidence of the development would bring substantial community benefits, such as major employment opportunities. My belief in this application is that it would bring substantial benefits to this particular community, and it follows the pattern that's along the overcliff within the ward, as has been highlighted by the officers. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the applicant because they've obviously worked very closely with the planning authority to take it on board. And the last thing which I'd appreciate, again, it comes back to the neighbourhood plan, is the mix. So the predominance of the 46%, I think it was, for 3-bedroom and 40% for 2-bedroom, and only 8% or 7% for the single 1-bedroom. So thank you very much for your time, Chair. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parkwell. So we move on now to the committee proceedings. First of all, as usual, any questions to the officer or officers about what you've heard, what you've seen when you went to look at the site, anything that needs clarification. When we've dealt with all the questions and answers, then we'll move on to debate about the rights and wrongs, pros and cons of this particular scheme. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, thank you very much. In section 130 of the report, it mentioned about the sliding gate to the car park, that it should be conditioned to reduce waiting times. Also should ensure that no gate will open outwards to across the footway. I sort of read that there was going to be no sliding gate, and the officer made mention that there was going to be a sliding gate. Could we just have a bit of clarification on whether there is one? And thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back on that, the sliding gate is proposed because the highways don't want gates swinging out into the pavement or across blocking. I can't remember the conditions exactly. I'll look through while we're answering while the next question is being posed to see what the conditions actually say. The application isn't for determination today. It's for determination to delegate powers back to the department to make a decision once we have a response on the drainage issue. So if the conditions don't specify the timing issue to prevent cars from queuing back, so it's operated on a sensor or a weight trigger so it opens quickly, that needs to be put in the condition. I can't remember writing those specific words, so it may well be that condition needs to be honed or tweaked. I'll check and come back to Councillor Tarley in due course if that's okay. But the aim is to have a condition that requires a sliding gate rather than gates that open on a hinge outwards into blocking pavement and so on.
Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, my concern related to the sliding gate isn't having necessarily a gated community for a block of flats like this, but it's more about delivery drivers. My experience, I've quite often you'll see delivery drivers. A lot of people are buying online these days, blocking roads where they can't. By this I mean small vans, without naming any well-known delivery companies, but small vans that turn up and block. That there's some provision or awareness made for the ubiquitous multi-drop delivery to this facility. Thank you.
Before we get an answer to that, Mr. Hedges got the actual wording of the condition, which he'll read.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So it's condition 23, which is actually restricting gates full stop. That's a proposal at the moment. So notwithstanding provisions of Part 1 and Part 2 of the General Permitted Development Order, any order revoking that order with or without modification, no additional vehicular entrance gates to the application site should be provided without the further specific grant of planning permission. So I think maybe we can tweak that to be clear about whether that's permitting one but not any more, or not permitting any more if you any at all, if you see what I mean. Yeah, I think we can we'll address that issue.
Happy? Thank you. Councillor Rice.
Sorry, just on the gate issue. I was concerned to see that there was a gate. Can you just clarify, is there going to be a gate or not?
Yeah.
Yes.
Chair, yes, I'll confirm that. If you look at your the layout plan, at the top where the access is, there's a dark black line which shows an electronic sliding gate set back, so it would allow a vehicle to be clear of the road before it turns in. So the condition would prevent any changes, or we need to change the condition to tweak it to make sure it wouldn't allow for alterations of those gates, but there is a gate that is currently proposed on site as a sliding gate.
Councillor Rice.
And from a planning point of view, do we have any opinion on providing gates to this type of? Generally, I don't like gates. To make it a gated community, I wondered if we have any opinion on that.
I personally don't like gated communities. I've always in my career have tried to not have them, and Bournemouth and Christchurch will have a similar approach that we want communities to be integrated. Here we are close to the sea and the coastal parking, where people are attempting to turn or looking for parking spaces may cheekily come in. So the parking gate is considered appropriate here. There is no foot gate to prevent residents and posties and people from coming up to see their neighbours and coming to the front door where people come in. But the parking would be secured, but the pedestrian element wouldn't be. That's the situation on this one. And generally speaking, that's an acceptable approach because with your bike you can still come in through the foot gate. You can still be part of the community. That's why the condition words no additional gates, because what we don't want is gates then to be put on for the pedestrian element. People can't nip in with their bag of rubbish from the beach and put it in the bin store because it's locked. But we don't want to stop this building and these residents being part of the community by closing them off.
Okay, that's really helpful.
So my understanding, but Mrs. Brunning will tell us in a minute, is that it's not a gated community as such. It's a gate to prevent vehicle access.
Yes, and as I say, if we are going to tweak that, we can make it clear that we want a gate that's appropriate and not a solid 2 metre high metal gate or something like that. We can get something that's railings or something that is low level, that is preventing the access as indicated, but is of an appropriate design. But we can cover that by a tweak to that condition. Or a tweak to the conditions, because we might actually need to control that by a separate condition, but we're noting what the committee is saying.
Thank you. Any more questions, Councillor Sidaway?
Thank you, Chair. I was interested in the heritage officers' points. Does the planning department just overrule them? Because there's a clear dispute between the two, and the planning officer just says, I disagree. And is that how that works? I don't see any explanation here of why planning overrules it, only that they disagree.
Might be able to help on this one.
Sorry,
wrong person.
Then that's fine, and either of us can answer. So our role as the planning officer will often be balancing potentially competing aims. As part of that, we may have objections from various parties, but that objection may not outweigh the benefits of the scheme. So what the case officer's done in this case is set out what they consider to be the benefits of what's otherwise a policy compliant scheme, particularly picking up on the neighbourhood plan policies for larger units. So there's benefit in the delivery of the affordable housing, and also under the government guidance, the weight that you attach to a heritage asset increases depending on the nature of its designation. So the weight to be attached to a Grade 1 listed building is much higher than a non-designated heritage asset. So it's in the balance. That's and Mr. Jennings set out in great deal of detail in the report how he's made that sort of balancing judgment. So it will on occasion be the case that you may have a constituency that objects to the scheme, but weighing the scheme in the balance, we may still be recommending approval.
Just to clarify that point, I think there's actually two aspects to the question, or two aspects to the answer to the question. I think first of all, and the position would be if the officer fundamentally disagreed with the assessment of the conservation officer, then they would need to explain and should explain in the report why they disagree. Separate to that, there is then the weighting point. So in other words, they may agree with what the conservation, they may not dispute the point that's being made, but they may consider that when it comes to weighing it all in the balance, they don't think it necessarily tilts the position in such a way as to mean they would refuse the scheme. And from what I understand, Mr. Hodges is saying it's the latter that would apply in this case.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor Gillett.
Yeah, so it's just going back to the report, and this may be my my lack of knowledge on these things, but the landscaping is a reserved matter. So, but a lot of what's there in terms of the sort of the ecology, and actually we're looking at the pictures, you know, that we've got all these trees around, are part of, they would be part of the landscaping. So does that mean that that would just that could be effectively changed after today if that's it.
I'll seek clarification. Thank you.
Yeah. Chair, so hang on, let me just get back up to the initial part of the report. So the report confirms that what It's an outline application seeking approval for access, layout and scale. So what we're looking at that plan on the right hand side of the slide, we would be committing ourselves to the layout of the site and then the height, number of floors of the building as part of this scheme. And in terms of the wider landscaping issues, if there are particular trees of interest on site we want to see protected, whilst landscaping might be a reserved matter for later, what we want the outline scheme to demonstrate is that you, in principle, can develop the site and keep those features of interest. So let's say we've got a large preserved oak in the site, we want to keep that. What we want to know at this stage with the layout, when we're committing to a layout, is that layout's compatible with those trees. What we will get at the reserve matters at the later date of the subsequent application, if your application is approved, is more details of boundary planting, replacement trees for some trees that may get removed, and greater detail on also hard landscaping, surfacing, boundary treatments, those kind of things.
Could we have something about the frontage, the planting at the frontage?
Yep, I can talk about that if that's okay, Jean, if that might, no, because I've got a better knowledge of that particular aspect. The frontage planting is in the ownership of the council. The red line of the site goes around, if you can see at the bottom of the screen that's on the show at the moment. This area here is actually outside of the ownership of the applicants. It's within the ownership of BCP. So any works to any trees or any changes or any augmentation would be down to us to agree. They've included that within the site because it's an already existing copse of landscaping, and that partly in way shields some of the existing building. Any works to those trees require a separate consent. If there's going to be any crown work or any replanting or any removal, requires a separate consent through the procedures. What the applicant wanted to do was to try and show that any landscaping scheme that comes forward in the future will work with the layout that's been agreed. And that includes the idea that indicatively there's enough space to go for additional planting and hedging around the boundaries. There's space to provide some trees along the street frontage and to the rear here. So in terms of the frontage, there are no changes proposed by this application. Obviously, looking at in the future, residents in these flats may want clearer views of the sea. The issue has been looked at by the tree team, and they've commented and made the right comment that no tree works are proposed with this application. They're all off of the ownership of the site. So in the future, should works be proposed to those trees, alternative planting, because this is kind of like self-seeded, it's grown up, it's not necessarily the best species for the location. There are better alternatives with some height that would have more majesty to the site and the location, the identity, which could be looked at the reserve matters, but they may well have to come forward as a separate proposal through the proper licensed works to those trees, where the developer may want to contribute to some of the funding, but they're not part of the application proposal. There's nothing on the forms talking about removal or demolition of those trees.
Yeah, can I just add to that? If you actually look at condition number 1, there is actually a tree protection plan and an arbor method statement and tree constraints plan that's actually conditioned as part of the approved plans. So that would ensure that any existing trees that are being retained, including those outside the site, would be properly protected.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you. Yeah, just looking at the cycle storage. Cargo bikes will be particularly relevant for that area, especially if there's going to be 3-bedroomed flats and 2-bedroom flats for transportation of small children. There's an over provision of traditional cycle units. I was just wondering, there's 2 individual stands. I was wondering if there were anything specific, but also is there anything about providing provision of space for electric cargo bikes?
On the plan,
and
yeah,
sorry, just one other aspect to that. Obviously, it relates to the entrance to the cycle space as well. Just the door is the same width as ordinary doors into the bedroom units, and so whether that would accommodate a cargo bike. I wouldn't like it to whatever was designed there to restrict any of the residents from being able to get one.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, of course I can. The proposed space is sufficient for 46 traditional cycle spaces. Obviously, at outline stage, we're looking at the general provision, that the layout of the building. The internal layout of this is subject to a condition that we want to see more detail of the kit that's going in there. As ever, these things are evolving as we move forward. Each of the flats, the spaces for the cars are to be allocated to each of the flats. So there will be a car parking space associated with a flat. So if a family chooses not to have a car and have a cargo bike instead, which is becoming the case in some situations, there is an uncovered space to store your bike with it behind a secure gate. Within the cycle storage area, the width of the door will need to be looked at when we come to actual appearance conclusions. But the space within, because we've got an overage, we've got, I think it's 17 or 18 additional spaces beyond what policy requires, could be reconfigured to provide some storage for cargo bikes. The issue is also to do with bin stores. If you look here, increasingly the waste team are asking for a space for boxes and detritus, so when you move in or when you buy a new television, all those big things that don't have anywhere to go. So an overflow space is something that's been requested to be dealt with, and which we have made provision for. The same within the cycle area, there'll be provision within the condition to deal with how that mix is going to satisfy the SPD on this, but nothing specifically at this point in time about cargo bikes.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I can appreciate that they could use their car parking space, but I don't imagine they're allowed to put any like shed on their car parking space to accommodate a cargo bike to protect it from weather, because they're obviously quite expensive pieces of transportation. So there would need to be somewhere that was protected from the elements, let alone theft. But that's great. Can we add in a condition that cargo bikes are considered for the cycle storage?
Off the top of my head, I don't think that's in our adopted parking SPD in terms of the requirements. So what we would do is consult with the highways officers when the reserve matters comes in, as Mr. Jenny's indicated, so that we can make sure it's ticking the box as far as the our adopted guidance is concerned. So the problem chair will be going beyond what we've adopted as guidance to ask for something that isn't in the guidance at this stage.
So we can't.
Yeah.
But the applicant has heard the discussion. So if there's no more questions, I'll open the meeting up to debate. Councillor Sidwell.
I think this is a unique proposal in my time on this committee for actually having some affordable housing spend on it, having full EV chargers and solar panels. The thing that troubles me with it is what it looks like, and that's why I mentioned the heritage aspect, because it doesn't seem to me like that we've taken more notice of what's gone on in the recent developments as opposed to the historic developments, and I would have liked to have seen a nod towards the property that's actually replacing. And it just feels a shame that we look and say it's the same as all the others. Do we really like all of the others? Other than that, I do think it's there's some things in here we'd love to have seen on some previous developments, so I can't complain about that.
To be fair, I think the report says they don't like all the others. The officer doesn't like all the others, the ones across the road. I think that my reading of the report.
It's still a very modern, and it was pointed out it was in sort of in keeping with the modern developments in the noughties. So,
Councillor Tarling.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to disagree with Councillor Sidwell here. I think the issue of the heritage. I mean, there are lots of this type of house in this area of Boscombe and Southbourne. Not that many left on the seafront, and the seafront is being developed for flats. Yet you don't have to go far back inland to see these large sort of 100-year turn of the century, last century Victorian houses of this style. So I don't think there's a shortage of this type of property. I think the point being made about the types of flats is we've got some noughties flats, we've got some glass and interesting brickwork type houses. Then we've got the stuff that's probably slightly earlier than that, types of flats going back to the 80s. As is the want of this type of seafront development, the developer's going to build what is most in vogue at the time, and I think it is of the fashion at the moment. this is the 1920s. Sorry, 2020s, 2020s style of building at the moment. And I'm sure when we get to the 2030s, there'll be a slightly different style, different materials. But I think it is in keeping with what is happening further down the road. So I'm happy to support the recommendations as laid out by the officer. I thank Councillor Farquhar as well for his very honest and introducing the fact that he's consulted with the neighbour plan as his residents and supports the scheme. So there's a lot to recommend it, but yeah, so I'm happy to actually make a proposal now that we accept the recommendations along with the comments already made.
Thank you. Have I got a seconder for that? Thank you. Councillor Adams.
Sorry, Chair, can I just recommendation as per the addendum? Because
yes, as per the addendum.
And Chair, does the councillor wish to pick up the issue of the gates as well?
I'm satisfied that the gate question was actually answered in the fact it's already conditioned, and that the access that is not a gated community, that there is that there will be pedestrian access, and that Mrs. Browning mentioned that it's not going to be a 2-metre high gate, satisfied me that we don't need to add further condition.
Chairman, I think the only slight issue is a slight ambiguity. I think Mr. Hodges identified that in condition 22, where it talks about no other gates, and it's just being clear whether the permission granted was allowing gates. So it might be beneficial to get some power given to the head of planning just to enable them to check that point and to tweak it if necessary to give clarity to what's permitted if the mover is prepared to accept that.
Yeah, what the officer just said. Okay.
Excellent, Chairman. Chairman, we can list the wording as necessary at the end.
Thank you. So we've now had a motion proposed and seconded. Anyone wish to speak to the issue?
Chair, can I just mention that actually condition 3D, 3C actually talks about site boundary treatment, including gates, which allows us to control the elevation plans of the means of enclosure, details, colours, finish, just to make it clear that that condition is already covering us, so we can control the style of the gates. So we don't need to tweak the condition again.
So,
as the other officer just said.
So do I take it from that the proposer is happy?
Yes, I was happy.
Is the seconder
I'm
happy?
still happy. Oh,
right, thank you. So if I don't see anyone else wishing to speak. Oh yes, sorry, Councillor Salmon.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I did just want to say one thing. I agree with broadly with what's been said so far. The scheme, I think I'd like to thank the case officer for a very good report, very detailed report that went into a lot of detail, particularly around this issue and the heritage. I think one thing that I wanted to say that maybe hasn't quite come up is what it raised for me was an issue around how much attention we give in BCP in our planning frameworks, in our policy frameworks, to preserving perfectly viable buildings and seeking to extend them, refurbish them, make use of them instead of knocking them down and starting all over again, because there is an environmental cost to doing that. There's nothing within our policy frameworks that doesn't allow that, and I'm not going to challenge this on that basis because it doesn't not accord with current policy. But I wanted to mention that because I think it is something that I feel a bit sad that we can't take a bit more account of and try a bit harder to try and retain some of our existing stock more readily. Does that make sense?
I share a lot of your concerns, but that is not something that we can consider particularly in relation to this one isolated application. But it is something to consider as we're drawing up the next local plan.
Indeed.
Very much something to consider as we're drawing up the next local plan.
Indeed.
So, no one else wishing to speak? So, I'm sure Councillor Tully would love to speak, but he's not going to. So we move to the vote. Those in favour of accepting the recommendation with the conditions and the 106 agreement, vote now, please.
So that is unanimous, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Oh, I hear it.
I couldn't hear anything, so I was messaging to say I appear to have lost sound. But yeah, I'm online. Thank you, Chair. Right, I'll just share my screen. Just bear
Right,
with me.
I'm sorry, I'm putting my microphone back on because I just spoke without my mic on. So we're good to go. We've got the picture, we've got the case officer on screen, we've got the sound. So hopefully we're ready to go.
We are certainly. Thank you, Chair. And good morning all. Right, are you able to see my screen?
We are, thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, so the site is at 12 Purewell in Christchurch. The application seeks to demolish existing buildings and erect a detached garage. So basically, that is the site. It's unusually larger than the neighboring properties. So that is how the extent of the garden and the flat is further down there. This just shows the existing elevation and floor plans of one of the buildings that's proposed to be demolished. I'll show you furthermore down the line in the photographs. So to put everything into context, part of the property itself is actually within Purewell Conservation Area. The proposed unit to replace the existing is just outside of the conservation area in there. So the amber area just shows the extent of the conservation area on this part of Purewell. And the green hatching shows the extent of TPOs. So that is the proposed site plan, and the unit will be erected there to use the existing footprint of the building. Right. I hope you can see these plans clearly. I got a bit of problems trying to tweak it so that they appear much larger, but I'm more than happy to share another drawing just to help members see the extent of the proposed building. So the mauve outline is just shows the existing building to be demolished. So it's and shows the relationship of how the roof ridge will be raised. That's the actual entrance to the site, which no changes are proposed. And that's the actual building that will be demolished and replaced by the proposed garage. That shed again will be demolished. Nothing is proposed to be erected in that area. So in regard to the fact that the site is actually outside of the conservation area, consideration has been given to the setting of the proposed development within the conservation to the heritage assets. So in this instance, it's accepted that the ridge will be much higher than the existing. But however, due to the low eaves height, I think that mitigates it together with the proposed materials. Materials will sort of be similar to the adjacent listed building. So I find that it is my assessment finds that it is acceptable. So the scheme has acceptable impacts on the setting of the conservation area and the actual listed building. Regard has also been given in terms of paragraph 202 of the NPPF. This is to do with the impact. It says the impact must be weighed against the public benefits for the proposal, including the appropriate securing its optimum viable use. In this instance, obviously, it is residential. There's no proposal to use the garage as commercial. So it is considered that it will facilitate the ongoing use of the property and removes the building, which detracts from the setting of the conservation area, and replacing a residential garage with the public benefit in this case is considered to outweigh any impacts on heritage assets. So I must say, I think from the photographs, in my view, it's very clear that the building is actually outdated and doesn't complement the grade 2 listed building. So the proposal, in my opinion, will be more acceptable and relate well to the heritage assets. This is the view from Purewell. With that increased ridge height, the garage will be viewed from Purewell, but due to setback, I think it's set back into the plot about 16 meters from the road frontage. So in that regard, it shouldn't be an imposing feature on the street scene, which is acceptable again. Concerns were raised in respect of loss of light and overbearing, mainly to number 15 and 16 Amsterdam Square. But however, as I said, the roof garage will actually pitch away from those neighboring properties. And based on the systems before me, the rear elevation of those properties to the nearest point of the garage is actually 11 meters. So that separation distance it mitigates that overbearing a view. And it will be, I think the view mainly will be from first floor windows rather than from the ground floor level. So in that instance, I feel that the proposal will not lead to loss of light or be an imposing feature. It also must be noted that upon a site visit, it was noticed that trees were actually felled prior to the application being submitted. So in that regard, a TPO was then further added to restrict any further felling of trees, which is acceptable. Concerns were also raised in terms of ecological impacts. Natural England were consulted, they raised no objections, and the site is not designated as an ecological site. So in planning balance, I think the proposal would respect and preserve the character and appearance of the surrounding area. The proposal is considered to respect residential living conditions and preserve the privacy of neighboring properties. It's also considered that the proposal would result in a material harm, it will not result in a material harm by way of loss of light, overbearing, or overlooking. And it has acceptable impacts on heritage sites. And so for those reasons and my report, the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions as listed in my report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mrs. Bunning wants to add something.
Yes, I just wanted to draw members' attention to the comments of the Conservation Officer, particularly bearing in mind what was said about the last application. At paragraph 15, you will see that the Conservation Officer considers that the proposal is now acceptable from a conservation point of view, as it would represent a betterment over the existing situation, in line with paragraph 206 of the NPPF and the policy of the Christchurch and East Dorset local plan. So just wanted members to be aware that the Conservation Officer supports this proposal.
Thank you. We have several people who've signed up to speak. First of all, we have two objectors. So if they could come to the microphone and introduce themselves.
So I'm David Tozer. I'm a resident of number 17 Amsterdam Square, which backs onto the garden of the property.
I'm Martin Vieira. I'm a resident of number 18 Amsterdam Square, also backs onto the property.
Thank you. So good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and a number of neighbours who have objected to the revised application, but who cannot be here today. The report before you recommending acceptance reads as though the replacement building design will have minimal impact on surrounding properties. The view that you see displayed here is from the garden decking of number 15 Amsterdam Square. And so if you imagine a further 2 metres of pitch roof added on top of that, you'll appreciate the impact on this property and that of others in the immediate area. Light is at a premium because of the protected trees that have grown to a significant height and now overshadow many of our gardens. This design proposal to store a car collection and therefore as a domestic garage does seem to be pretty substantial. The existing sloping roof arrangement that we have displayed here does not impact adjacent properties, but with the proposed general size and in particular 5-metre roof height, it will make a big difference. The view from Purewell that you saw earlier on is largely irrelevant because any building on the plot of number 16 will hide the building that is proposed. As acknowledged in your committee report, the pitch roof design will impact significantly on the trees growing at the back wall. You can see the one in the centre of the picture there. And with a change in water runoff by putting downpipes to the front of the building rather than the rear as at present, this will simply add to the surface water flooding that occurs regularly in the garden of this property. Indeed, the flood risk assessment for the local area shows increased risk of flooding within 10 years at the front of numbers 10 and 12, as well as the access road between 12 and 14. The application contains a number of unfortunate errors in relation to flooding and other aspects, and these were highlighted in our objections to the original application. The report highlights concerns over disturbance to protected trees and root structures, but the application is silent on a number of aspects, including proposed changes to the hard standing, which, as you saw, is likely to be needing to be replaced. The required level of new foundations to support the new structure, any ventilation systems for car storage and drainage design. It does not address the access and parking arrangements for number 10 Purewell, which currently shares access and parking at this property. In summary, we consider the design is not appropriate because of the impact on adjoining properties and ask you to refuse approval in its current form. Thank you.
Do carry on.
Thank you for allowing me to speak to this committee. I'm a neighbour to 12 Purewell. I object to a revised planning application on height grounds. The design looks more like a bungalow than a domestic garage. The stated height of the proposed building, 5 metres in total, would appear to be considerably higher and more visually intrusive than the original storage shed and could be considered an attempt to establish a height baseline. The applicant's old elevation drawing appears to be incorrect. It shows the original roof has been flat at 4 metres, whereas the existing building slopes from front to back, by my estimate, from 4 metres down to 3 metres. The 3-metre height is on the property boundaries, as can be seen in that diagram there. A diagram and photo can be found in my revised application objection document on page 2. These show an increased height of 2 metres from the height of the lower edge, which is also 6.5 metres closer to the rear view of the building, imposing itself more onerously and blocking out any light and outlook that exists currently from that view. The new building with the proposed roof would extend considerably into the canopy of the existing overhanging trees. What height is needed for a garage? My domestic garage is 2.6 metres in height. A building with a rear height of 2.6 metres, say rising at the front to 2.9 metres, would give adequate height and roof drainage and impose less intrusively on the surroundings. The application is silent on the impact of new foundations on adjacent tree roots and the drainage impacts if the existing hard standing is disturbed. Less than 20 metres away, the site floods in heavy rain. It's still the site of a drainage ditch. If approved, the new foundation should only be deep enough to support the approved structure. If the application is granted, I would urge that all the restrictions proposed by officers and consultees be imposed and my suggested roof line adopted. For further details, see my 2 objection statements. Thank you for your time. Okay.
Thank you. And we also have speakers, or a speaker, on behalf of the applicant, and it's Mr. Annan again.
Hello again, members. The applicant has worked closely with your officers in order to address the initial concerns of the conservation and tree officers and of the local residents. The scheme has been amended to remove one of the two proposed outbuildings, removal of the new hard sanding to access the second building, and a revised design of the remaining building. The scheme is now a simple replacement of an existing residential outbuilding with one of virtually the same size. I wish to now briefly outline the main considerations why we feel planning permission should be granted today in line with the officer's recommendation. Firstly, conservation of trees. Whilst the proposed building is not actually within the conservation area or curtilage of the listed building, it is of course part of the setting of both. The existing building is of a poor quality and considered to have a detrimental impact on the setting of the conservation area and listed building. The proposal will involve a modest increase in height, but on the other hand, will have a design more appropriate to the conservation setting, with design and materials being more fitting. It is considered the proposal represent an improvement over the existing situation in terms of conservation and heritage, and this is recognised by your conservation officer, as confirmed by Mrs. Jean Brunning. As the proposed building is on the footprint of the existing building, there'll be no harm to trees. The tree officer now raises no objection, subject to a suggested planning condition, which the applicants are happy to agree to. The tarmac hard standing to access the proposed building already exists. No vegetation will be lost. Second, neighbour amenity. As you've seen, the proposed building is virtually the same size as one it replaces. It's actually slightly smaller in footprint. Whilst it uses a pitch roof as part of its traditional design, the key is that the eaves level on the residential boundaries to the east would not be higher than that of the existing building. The pitch is as shallow as possible for a tiled roof, and with the roof pitching away from the neighbouring properties and gardens, the proposed buildings will have a negligible effect on the daylight and outlook, particularly taking into account the surrounding trees and taller building nearby. We understand neighbouring residents' concerns about the possibility of more extensive development on this site adjacent to their rear boundaries, but the scheme must be judged on its own merits, and this is not what is being proposed here. This proposal is for a simple replacement residential outbuilding. Finally, flood risk. This has been raised by some local residents. The proposal is for a replacement domestic outbuilding with no habitable accommodation and finished floor levels no lower than the existing building. As the proposal would not place property or people at greater risk of flooding than the existing. As the proposed building would have a slightly smaller footprint than the existing building, it would not displace more flood water and increase the flood risk elsewhere. Councillors, you are being asked to decide on a replacement domestic outbuilding, which, as acknowledged by your conservation officer, represents a betterment to the setting of the conservation area and listed building, and in your planning officer's judgment is of sufficiently similar scale to the existing not to have any detrimental impact on the amenities of neighbouring residents. I hope you agree with all of your officers' recommendation to grant planning permission and vote in favour of approving this proposal accordingly. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Annan. And we have a ward councillor also wishing to speak. He will be online. It's Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity. And what I would do is like to welcome the words given by the officer in terms of this application. I appreciate this is a very marginal case, but I think some of the points made by the residents need to be borne in mind and need to be considered in terms of the committee's decision. In particular, I'd like to emphasise that this is a higher level than that exists at the moment and will have a detrimental effect on the neighbours, certainly to the east. And in terms of I appreciate I think there was one photo in there as the view from Purewell, which clearly it will not affect that, and I didn't feel that was very worthwhile, and in fact quite irrelevant. It's the view from the other side from the east that was important. So I do think there will be some loss of light, as was clearly demonstrated in Mr. Tozer's application to some of the residents on that side. I think there was a comment made by the officer about the fact that there would be no there's no significant ecological benefit, I think, from was mentioned, and I would challenge that insofar as this particular area does have quite a significant amount of ecological benefit to the area. However, I do appreciate this particular building will not have a particularly detrimental effect on it. I also think that the officer and the applicant has mentioned the fact that there will be no flood risk, but I think, as was demonstrated by Mr. Tozer, particularly, that the way in which the downpipes are now going to be configured, that there would be, and we need to be very careful about this particular area, because there is, as was mentioned, some significant future flood risk. So that would be points I would like to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Before we proceed, Mrs. Brunning wants to talk about one of the conditions.
Yes, Chair, thank you. The wording of condition 5 isn't quite how we would normally word it. It's the one which actually puts in further details, and it actually at the moment says that they only need to submit details. What it should read is details should be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority prior to commencement of works. We haven't got the approved bit in the condition, so with that we would like your just to change the wording around slightly to make it read better. So not changing the substance of it though.
So thank you. So everybody clear that the wording of condition 5 needs a slight amendment. So we open up to questions now. I want to start on the subject of the foundation and the hard standing. My impression from the report was that the proposal is to use the current foundation concrete base and the hard standing as is. Could the officer confirm or put me right if that's not a correct interpretation?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so basically they propose to use the existing hard standing.
What about the foundation base?
Just bear with me.
The concrete base?
So basically, yeah. So within the proposal, they don't propose any new foundations other than to use the existing the existing slab that is there.
Thank you. So no works on the hard standing or the concrete base. They will be as is. Thank you very much. So any other questions? Councillor Flagg.
Thank you, Chair. Is it possible for the officer to put back up on the screen the image of the existing building, just so I can?
You mean the one with the shed in as well?
Well, preferably the one without
the one
shed.
front end.
Yeah, just the front. But if it's
Is
possible,
that possible?
thank you, Chair.
I see. It's being worked on. No, you're muted.
Is that for the existing plans or the actual photograph?
Yes, the garage that's there.
Photograph, Welly.
So there's this one that shows the actual building that will be replaced, and then the next one shows the garden shed as well.
We can't see any photos. We can see you, but we can't see the photos.
Sorry. Right, let's get these up. Just bear with me.
Is that the one, Councillor Flagg, or the other one?
Oops. Just bear with
the
me.
front. Yeah, I think I know the one you mean. That one. That one. Yeah. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Is it possible to advise the committee whether the trees that are in that photograph have been the trees that have been removed?
Is that question you can answer?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So the trees that have been removed, if I bring up the site plan, I think that would be a bit more clearer. So the trees that have been removed are sort of further away from the actual existing structure. So what they did is, from the site visit, they left 3 trees in between, where the new hard standing would have gone on the other side. Then the 3 trees would have been preserved, and those are the 3 trees that have now been TPO'd. But the trees within the photograph are actually existing. They're still in situ.
Happy?
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm then, on the drawing, 9714/100, which is up on the screen, those trees that are existing are marked up as G11 in the triangle there. Am I correct?
Yes, I'm just trying to get my my main plan up on screen. Just bear with me, Councillor. Thank you.
Well, they're not necessary because those are behind that block, aren't they? They're not the ones that we could see on the photograph.
So the ones you could see on the photograph, in that area there, with the triangles. So those are the trees there, and there's trees on adjoining neighboring property there.
So, Councillor Flagg, are you talking about the white circles, G11?
That's correct. Yeah.
Because they're outside the site.
Yes, but
so
they're there.
Yes, but they're outside the site, so they will not be.
My question.
That's not part of the application, and therefore will not be touched by the developer. What the residents of the property that they're on do is another matter.
I fully.
Right, so you're happy now. Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Sidaway.
I just wanted to pick up on the flood risk, and I was interested in the comment that the downpipes were key to that and the position of them. I wonder if the officer could explain whether they've moved and whether they from the existing one, and whether that is a real issue or not.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, in terms of the scale of this application, the applicant has satisfied the current regulation. It's one application that does not require a flood risk assessment. So, I mean, I would find it difficult to refuse an application based on flooding in this instance.
Yes, if I could just add to that, also the footprint and in fact the area of roof that the property has is pretty much unchanged, so we wouldn't expect there to be any greater flood risk as a result of the replacement.
No, I absolutely accept that, and I read that into it. I think it was more the question that I think what was being said was that if you position the downpipes in a different location, now it is a sloping roof, all that water will be going into a location it isn't currently going into. I just wanted to know if that's the case, and that's why there's an increased flood risk. The fact that it's the same size, I absolutely get.
So, did you get that question, Mr. Book? That basically it's are they using the same soakaway, I suppose?
Yeah, I don't believe it will increase the risk of flooding from what's already existing. It's just obvious it is the positioning will change due to the proposed roof structure. But in terms of flooding, I believe that the risk still minimal. It shouldn't increase from what it is at the moment.
So will the downpipe end up in the same place as it currently does, even if it starts from a different place? So that it's feeding the same.
I think the simple answer is no. It will be in a different position due to the actual roof structure.
I think that's the very nature of the objection, though, isn't it? So I mean, it may seem a minor point,
Yeah,
but I think it is worth.
I think we're
probably-
getting an answer possibly from
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Ronnie.
Yeah, Chair, I think the concerns were raised when there was going to be that additional area of hard standing, which has now been removed from the proposal. So now all you've got is the area of the existing slab where the new building is going to go. But there was originally, in the original scheme, an additional building and an additional area of hard standing, which is no longer part of this proposal.
And I believe the objector knew that. I still objected to it, so I thought it was worth, you know, it may be a minor point, but as you said, Chair, if that water is now going in, it's missing the soakaway. Where is it going?
Is it going to a new soakaway? Is that the idea? I'm looking for information, if possible, from the officer.
Chair, yeah, I mean, there's no new proposed soakaways other than the use of what's existing. But obviously, if members feel that we do need a new soakaway, I believe we can actually add a condition to the decision notice to require them to submit plans showing where the new soakaways would be located.
Okay, I think you've just answered the original question. The existing soakaway will be used. What was that? I thought that's what he said.
Chair, what we could do is if members have got concerns about this, we could say in the event that a new soakaway was proposed, then we could condition that. But otherwise, we would assume that they are using the existing one. So we could actually condition any details of any new soakaway to be submitted to us.
Would that satisfy you, Councillor Sidaway?
Yeah. I think so. Let me just I don't want to make a big point of this, but where does the water go currently? Does it go into a soakaway or does it go into a rainwater drain? And if it does, where's the if it's just hitting the ground, where is it going? That I think is the concern that's raised by the resident.
Talked about a soakaway, but he'll confirm.
But it goes into a soakaway, presumably because it comes down a downpipe. That's
Yes, and unfortunately, the plans do not actually confirm that. I think, as Jean said, it's assumed that we are using the existing.
We're just checking the application
Chair,
form to see if it says something.
If it makes life easier, we could condition that before they undertake the application, that they submit details of where the drainage is going to go, and then that would satisfy, you know, either solution.
That sounds like a belt and braces answer.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Any more questions from anyone else? Yes.
What's the
Councillor Martin?
Thank you. What's the current use of the building? Because it doesn't look like it's a garage at the moment. It's a change of use, isn't it? And I was wondering with this design, if the applicant might at a later date want to change it, although they want a garage now, might want it to be a dwelling of some sort.
Previous experience says we cannot mind read what the applicant might want to do. That would be subject to a further application should a change of use at that stage be wanted. I stand to be corrected by the officers, but that's my understanding.
No, it's a domestic outbuilding at the moment. It has been used for garaging, and there's a condition actually controlling its future use as a domestic garage. Any other use would require planning permission in any event, including any commercial use of it.
Thank you.
Just to clarify on that point, is planning permission or permitted development?
Sorry?
Would there be no option on a pipe?
Yeah. Martin.
Second question. Basically, I thought somebody mentioned that the roof ridge, that it was going to be slightly further forward, but on the diagrams it looks like it's a symmetrical roof. But I was wondering if is it asymmetrical with slightly forward?
Standard pitch.
Yeah, it's a symmetrical roof.
It's symmetrical. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks.
So, no further questions. We can move on to debate. Anyone want to start us off? Any thoughts? Right, I'll do it myself. I can't, having been to see the site and heard the presentation today and read all the documents, I cannot see any reason not to approve this. I accept that the pitch of the roof is higher, but it's a pitched roof, so it's not the whole roof. I know from the side it doesn't look that much difference, but it is sloping away from the properties, from the Purewell end, which is the end that most people will see it from as they walk past or drive past. I grant it, I accept that people living in the houses are important, but it is a very small number. The bigger number of people will see it from the road, until the vacant plot is built on, which will no doubt it will be in due course. We look forward to that, and any application coming to this committee in due course. But at the moment, it's visible from the road, so we have to look at it on that basis. So I can't actually see any reason not to accept this, but I'm open to the debate. I hope others will wish to speak on the subject. Councillor Martin.
Would it be possible to put a condition on it so that it is an asymmetrical roof? Because I'm thinking where it backs onto the, I forgot the name, the square at the back, the two gentlemen, Amsterdam Square, thank you. It would have, if you brought the roof forward a little bit, and so it's sloping more at the back, that would have less of an impact on Amsterdam Square.
We need to make a decision on the basis of the plans that are before us. Actually, the eaves height at in the view that you saw from the neighbour's property is actually lower than the existing monopitch, so it'll actually start lower at that boundary. We'll get higher in the middle, come down the other side, but no, we do need to determine the application of what we've got before us currently.
Councillor Adam.
I'm not sure if you made a proposal or not, but if not, I'm happy to, subject to the change in condition 5. So the details should be submitted to the local planning authority and approved in writing prior to the commencement of the works on the site. And the addition, with the additional condition, so before they undertake work, to submit details of where the drainage will go. And if using an alternative soakaway, something to do with getting it approved in writing prior to commencement, something along those lines. So just to try and mitigate the potential additional flood risk. So I'll be happy to propose on that basis.
Have we got a seconder? Councillor Gillett, thank you. So do you wish to speak or just second?
I'll just second. Yeah,
right. Any more comments? Right, let's move to the vote. We have the proposal seconded to accept the recommendation with the changes to conditions. Those in favour, please vote now. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, Joe, I don't think we're closing the meeting as such. I think the request is, can we have an extra urgent item which you agreed to?
Yeah.
So we're not closing the meeting as such.
Okay.
Not at this moment, Chair.
Subject. It's probably just as well I didn't have it on then. So we're ready to, we've had a request which I've agreed to consider a matter of urgent business. The reason for urgency is to allow members to be promptly informed of emerging issues relating to a planning matter which involves certain material timing issues. And we're requested to consider this as an exempt matter, i.e. below the line. It's in accordance with meeting procedure rules 7.2, and I've agreed it on that basis. So I could, if you're happy to go ahead, I will read out the exclusion notice and then we could take it from there, okay? Under section 100, brackets A4, of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 5 in part 1 of the Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in withholding the information outweighs such interest in disclosing the information. So if we're happy to proceed on that basis.
So proposed.
Thank you. Those in favour? Okay. I know everybody's looking very puzzled, but
Go exempt.
so we're going exempt. We're going below the line. The recording will be switched off. We're just talking in the room now.
So is that agreed by them?
Yes, it was definitely a majority.
Do you want to just take a vote?
We did take a vote, but taking a vote again.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
That's more than half.
Any against?
I think everybody else is abstaining because they really don't know what we're talking about, which is quite. I'm not surprised at all.
Okay.